This is the 5 Minute Writing Corner with Troy Bernardo. Over the last few years, I've been reading more and more books on writing and on creativity, and some of them are helpful and great, and some are a complete waste of time. So I thought it'd be fun and kind of a good exercise for me to go back over these books, see what I liked and disliked about each of them, and give you kind of the key takeaways so you can try and use them in your writing or your creative process just as a fun kind of activity. I'll also be putting all the links to these books below in the description. So let's start with number 6, Story Genius. Now this book, a lot of people like it. It's a good way to kind of maybe look at story in a new way. It does provide insight in how we as humans and people are kind of wired for stories. Why it's important to create stories, things like that. To be honest, I really enjoyed the beginning of this book. I thought it was good. They kind of talk about how we're wired for the stories. That there's a lot of links to the collective unconscious. There's a lot of good takeaways early on in the book. Then, unfortunately, at least for me, I feel like it kind of went off the rails. I didn't think it really stayed on track with that kind of initial momentum of the book. Things get, especially after that first chapter or two, just kind of bad. For me personally, I think it's not a good writing instruction. As a pantser or someone who always kind of writes from the seat of their pants, I don't really see this as good organic story growth. And it's not really how I personally would do this at all. Big time con is there's this constant horrendous example of a story about a dog or something. It's just not good. It's just a long, kind of drawn out, nonsensical story that would never, I think, personally, sell. The dog in her fake story that isn't being written is famous or something. It's just awful. The prose, structured way to plot out your story, gives a good method. It's pretty specific, but if that's how you like to write stories, that's fine. Cons, terrible examples, way too confining. It certainly isn't for me. Overall, I don't think this is a bad book, but I know it's not for me. Number 5, Big Magic. Not specifically about writing, but art in general. Big Magic's a fun way to consider, making art in a new light. It's nice to be reminded not to take yourself seriously. That art is supposed to be fun. That painting pictures, writing stories are things that we're kind of made to do, right? It's not a torturous problem that you need to be taking out on people around you. It's a fun, exciting thing to do that we've been doing really since the beginning of time. The author who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, she makes fun of herself, doesn't take herself too seriously, which is nice. And I do think there's some really positive things in it. It helps us consider the muse, how we get out of a writing or creative rut. It gives the pros, I'd say, is it gives a grounded look at how we make art and why it's fun to do it. The cons is it's not specifically about writing or any art for that matter. So it can be kind of loosey-goosey. And I consider myself a bit of a hippie, but this is kind of aura, crystally, magic-y kind of in a way. Number 4, we got The War of Art. Like Big Magic, this is a great read for understanding art no matter the discipline. The author talks about fighting what he calls resistance with a big capital R. The idea that we need to find ways to fight through that resistance to do art, even if it's challenging or we don't want to or we're having a rough day. Which I think a lot of artists can relate to regardless of their discipline. So he tells us to expect fear, to try and remember that you'll be scared no matter what you're doing. Right? There's a lot of really positive elements in this book, I think. Very inspirational, gives good perspective on how a writer or any artist, for that matter, should approach art and resistance. We're going to be fighting any kind of resistance, whether it be our day-to-day jobs, our life, whatever. So it gives some good perspective on that. The cons, once again, doesn't specifically deal with writing, to try and widen its audience, right? We don't get a lot of specifics on how to battle resistance other than just do the work, which truly, that's what else can you do, ultimately? I put this in there to be fair, and it gave me a Ferris wheel. What else can you do, ultimately? Number 3, Save the Cat. Classic screenplay handbook for writers. Save the Cat helps us consider how to write stories, find the beats that we need in filmmaking and in storytelling. Save the Cat has become an industry on its own. There's spin-off books, there's software, there's cards, seminars, and there's so much more just around this kind of methodology. In this book, we get a real look at how to make story engaging. However, that specifically deals with movies other than other types of writing. Now, I know there's other spin-off books, like I said, but this is the one I'm talking about. I put the link below to the website so you can see the rigidity of the system. Once again, as a pantser, not really for me. But the pros are, it helps you see rhythm, understand high concept movies and stories, and really makes you think about how to pace a story, right? And how not to bore your audience to tears, which is pretty important, regardless of the medium. Also has real concrete method of storytelling and how to map out our stories using like index cards and things like that. The cons are we're getting quote-unquote real Hollywood advice from The Big Shot, who made stupid movies like Blank Check and Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, and they're both just terrible. I mean, I don't want to be mean to the guy, but that's just my take. Also, once again, specifically for movie writers and not the best for short story or novel writers. Good to consider, but I wouldn't live or die by it. 2, Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit. That's from the author who actually did War on Art. While War on Art focuses on art in general and the resistance of art, this gives us clearer writer-focused materials in kind of more a manual. Pros, we get that concrete information on story structure and how to make good stories. We learn about theme, concepts, the 3-act structure, stakes, characters, and so much more in this book. It's a good tool for writers, and while it doesn't give a rigid structure, it's good to remember the stories need structure. And that's helpful for any plotter or pantser. Things need to happen that are interesting in a story for people to want to read it. You can't just have random things happening. Cons, people who have been writing for a long time might not find the book super helpful. There's some kind of duh things in it. That's most of 1-star Amazon reviews. Make this very clear, I'm a seasoned writer, I'm whatever. Gotta be honest though, it's still good to remind yourself, great book. Number 1, classic on writing, probably the most quoted source of any solid writing advice. We'll go ahead and boil this down to the most important takeaways here. Most important, number 1, stay away from adverbs. He really harkens on that idea. You also want to stay away from unnecessary dialogue tags. Just do he said or she said, not he screamed or she chortled. Keep it simple with the saids. You also need to write a lot and regularly to be a good writer. Pros, great advice from a seasoned writer, probably the most famous writer in America. Who doesn't think Stephen King is kind of one of the most important writers of the 20th century, right? This is a real successful writer giving you real advice, and that's really why the book is so good and so important. There's a lot of meat on it as well. It's a fun read, so that's good as well. King does not shy away from his drug and alcohol abuse, nor does he act like he's the greatest writer of all time. He understands that he's made a career out of it, but he's doesn't really consider himself quote-unquote one of the greats. Very accessible book, very easy to read. Cons, we get into Stephen King's life more than writing advice, and this makes it more entertaining, but I'd like to learn more about the craft. In general, it's a little bit short in the craft area. Here's some honorable mentions as well in terms of the writing books that I didn't think really necessarily made the list. Writing great fiction, storytelling tips and techniques, that's a great Courses Plus you can take, and it's also on Audible. And of course, the elements of style. More of a grammar and style book, but still super important for writers. So thanks again for tuning in. The feedback and the messages have been great. I've loved all the comments on my other videos, and it's been really cool, guys. Honestly, I was really reticent to do this, and I think it's been actually really fun. So hopefully you're enjoying watching them as much as I'm enjoying making them. So thank you again. Have a great day and a great weekend, and keep on writing.